I was a kid, grew up with low self-esteem, and not having a father image to really give me the strength that a young boy needs. And so the martial arts really kind of turned me around.
That voice, that quiet confidence, that is not a character. That is not a performance. That is a man who built himself from nothing. And today, for the first time, we tell the full story of everything he built and everything he left behind. Carlos Ray Norris was born on March 10, 1940 in Ryan, Oklahoma. The name Carlos came from his father's minister. Nobody called him that for long. The childhood that followed was not the stuff of Hollywood dreams. His father, Ray, was a World War II veteran who worked as a mechanic, a bus driver, and a truck driver, and carried a drinking problem that cast a long shadow over the household. He described himself as extremely quiet and introverted as a young man, which he attributed directly to his father's alcoholism and the family's deep poverty. When his parents eventually divorced, Chuck, or still a teenager, became the quiet anchor of a household trying to hold itself together. He helped his mother raise his two younger brothers. He didn't play sports. He didn't stand out. He was the boy nobody saw coming. After graduating high school, he joined the United States Air Force in 1958 and was stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea. It was there, thousands of miles from Oklahoma, that everything changed. He discovered Tang Soo Do. He discovered what it felt like to be good at something. And he discovered the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life, Chuck. From that moment forward, the quiet boy from Oklahoma no longer existed.
The thing is, worry doesn't solve the problem, and actually hinders the problem. What you've got to do is try to find ways of solving that solution, or that problem, finding a solution for the problem. And if you do, then you don't have time to worry about it.
A bigger door. That is how Chuck Norris saw every single setback in his life, not as an ending, as a redirection. And the door that opened next changed everything. He became the 6-time undefeated world professional middleweight karate champion from 1968 to 1974. 6 consecutive titles. Nobody touched him. Nobody came close. But here is what nobody is talking about. While Chuck Norris was dominating every tournament in America, he was also quietly building a network that would launch him into a completely different world. Among his many private students were Priscilla Presley, Steve McQueen, the Osmonds, and Bob Barker, who famously recounted incurring cracked ribs after being kicked in the side by Norris during a training session. Let that land for a moment. The king of rock and roll's wife, training under Chuck Norris. Bob Barker, America's most beloved TV host, going home with broken ribs from a session. And then came the moment that changed everything. Steve McQueen, the coolest man alive at that point in Hollywood, pulled Chuck aside after a session and told him something that redirected his entire future.
One of my private students, Steve McQueen, said to me, "Well, what are you going to do now that you're no longer fighting?" I said, "Well, I don't know. I'll probably just continue teaching." And he says, "Have you ever thought about being an actor?" But he says, "I just have an instinct and a feeling that you could do well."
That single conversation between a karate champion and a movie star in a dojo is the reason Chuck Norris became a legend. Without Steve McQueen saying those words, there is no Walker, Texas Ranger. There is no Missing in Action. There is no $70 million empire. There is just a karate teacher in California that nobody ever heard of. But there was one other moment that Hollywood always mentions first, and it happened in Rome. Friend and fellow martial artist Bruce Lee invited him to play one of the main villains in The Way of the Dragon in 1972. 2 of the most dangerous men on the planet, sharing a screen, in the Colosseum, for the only time in history. Chuck Norris lost the fight on screen, but he won the attention of the entire world. By the 1980s, Chuck Norris wasn't just a star. He was an industry. He starred in Missing in Action, Code of Silence, the 2 Delta Force films, Firewalker, and became Canon Films' most prominent star, appearing in 8 films over 4 years. Film after film, each one landing harder than the last. But what nobody is talking about is the number behind all of it. Walker, Texas Ranger, the show that defined the second chapter of his career, generated more than $692 million in revenue over its entire run. $692 million from one television show. And here is where it gets even more interesting. His net worth at the time of his death stood at $70 million, built across multiple revenue streams including acting, television production, martial arts schools, book sales, and a growing portfolio of lifestyle and wellness businesses. But the money was never the point.
Now we have 9,000
kids in 56 schools.
And 90,000 kids have gone through the program.
And 90,000 have graduated the program.
So we believe that you don't have to travel around the world to find your mission because it literally is in your backyard.
Yeah.
That ranch in Navasota, Texas wasn't just where he lived. It was the headquarters of an empire, a water company, a nonprofit, a lifestyle brand, built not by a Hollywood executive, but by a kid from Oklahoma who never once forgot where he came from. Most action stars sell their image for one era. Chuck Norris sold his for 6 decades. And the internet, completely free of charge, made him more famous in retirement than he ever was at his peak. Chuck Norris facts went viral online with such hyperbolic statements as Chuck Norris had a staring contest with the sun and won, and they wanted to put Chuck Norris on Mount Rushmore, but the granite wasn't tough enough for his beard. He didn't fight the memes. He embraced them, published a book about them, and used them to introduce himself to an entire generation that had never seen a single one of his films. Most men retire and disappear. Chuck Norris retired and went viral. Behind the legend, there was a man, and that man's personal life was far more complicated than Hollywood ever showed you. His first wife was Diane K. Holchek. She met Norris while they were teenagers at North High School in Torrance, California, and married when she was just 17. They stayed together for 3 decades. Through the poverty, through the martial arts years, through the rise to Hollywood, during their marriage they welcomed 2 sons, Mike and Eric, both of whom later stayed connected to the entertainment and stunt industry. But the marriage ended in 1989, and then came a secret that Chuck Norris carried for decades. The man who had built his entire brand around strength and moral clarity, suddenly confronted with the most human moment of his life. He didn't hide from it. He didn't deny it. He welcomed her, because that is who Chuck Norris actually was when nobody was watching. Then came Gena O'Kelley, a former model he met in the late 1990s. They married on November 28, 1998. She wasn't just his wife, she was his business partner, his mission partner, his anchor. The couple had fraternal twins born in 2001, son Dakota Allen Norris and daughter Danilee Kelly Norris. And when Gena faced serious health challenges in her later years, Chuck Norris did something that surprised the entire industry. He stepped back from Hollywood entirely to care for her. No press conference, no announcement, no drama. He just chose his wife over his career, without blinking.
And my wonderful, 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 wonderful husband, who I'm so thankful. Thank you, baby. He stayed by my side for 5 months while I was in this hospital. In this machine alone, I've done probably about 100 dives. We call them dives, just to help heal my brain.
He didn't just find a wife, he found a partner, a mission, a reason to step back from everything Hollywood was offering him and choose something quieter and far more important. Norris is survived by 5 children, stunt performers Mike and Eric with his first wife Diane, twins Dakota and Danilee with his wife Gena, and Dina, the daughter revealed in his autobiography. 5 children, each one carrying a piece of who he was. Mike and Eric followed him into the entertainment industry, working behind the camera and stunts and production. Eric became a competitive NASCAR driver. Mike moved into directing and producing. The twins Dakota and Danilee were raised largely away from public attention, given the childhood of privacy and normalcy that Chuck Norris himself never had. And Dina, the daughter he discovered at 26, became proof that it is never too late to be a father. At the time of his death, Norris had 6 grandchildren and was expecting a 7th, as son Michael Norris's wife announced she was pregnant in January 2026. He died knowing a 7th grandchild was on the way, and that grandchild will grow up knowing exactly who their great-grandfather was. The $70 million is real, the films are real, the championships are real, but none of that is the legacy that will outlast everything else. In 1992, Norris started his own charitable organization called Kickstart Kids, with help from President George H.W. Bush, providing martial arts training to middle school students to learn respect, discipline, and self-esteem. A boy who grew up invisible built an organization so that no child would ever have to feel that way again.
And it's through the philosophy of it and encouraging them that they can be successful. Because many of these kids are very smart. It's just that they have a defeatist attitude and they don't feel like they can accomplish anything. But once you instill that in them, that confidence that you can be anything you want to be, they'll take it and run with it. And boy, you don't know where they're going to go with it. And you know, and my goal is one day to have one of my Kickstart students as a U.S. Senator, U.S. Congressman, maybe the next president.
More than 100,000 children. That is not a statistic. That is 100,000 individual kids who walked into a gym feeling like nothing and walked out believing they could be something. That is the legacy no meme can capture. No box office number can ever measure. Chuck Norris believed karate was not only a physical practice but something that strengthens a person mentally, or psychologically and emotionally. He didn't just teach people how to fight, he taught them how to stand up. And what nobody is talking about is this. The man who the internet turned into an immortal joke was privately one of the most quietly generous human beings Hollywood ever produced. No flashy donations, no press releases, no charity galas designed to generate headlines. Just a man, writing checks, showing up for kids, staying out of the spotlight while doing it. Most men retire and disappear. Chuck Norris retired and went viral. He didn't fight the memes. He embraced them and used them to introduce himself to an entire generation that had never seen a single one of his films.
Because when Chuck Norris does push-ups, he doesn't push himself up, he pushes the earth down. Rather than being birthed like a normal child, Chuck Norris instead decided to push his way out, punch his way out, punch his way out. Chuck Norris once shot down a German fighter plane with his finger by yelling, "Bang." Now, this is one of my favorites here. When the boogeyman goes to sleep every night, he checks his closet for Chuck Norris.
Most men retire and disappear. Chuck Norris retired and went viral. He didn't fight the memes. He embraced them and used them to introduce himself to an entire generation that had never seen a single one of his films. On March 10, 2026, Chuck Norris turned 86 years old. Just days before his death, he was seen in a social media post, beating up an opponent in Hawaii, declaring he doesn't age. He levels up. 9 days later, he was gone. The man who had defeated every opponent in front of him had taken his final breath. And for millions of people who had grown up watching him on screen, it felt like losing something they never expected to lose. Then came the statement that stopped the world. His family posted to Instagram, "It is with heavy hearts that our family shares the sudden passing of our beloved Chuck Norris. While we would like to keep the circumstances private, please know that he was surrounded by his family and was at peace. To the world, he was a martial artist, actor, and a symbol of strength. To us, he was a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, an incredible brother and the heart of our family. He lived his life with faith, purpose, and an unwavering commitment to the people he loved." When a Texas governor and Sylvester Stallone both stop what they are doing to mark a passing, the man was never just a celebrity. He was a cultural institution. Chuck Norris was born poor. He was born shy. He was born to a father who left and a family that struggled to hold itself together. And from that, he built a $70 million empire, a 6-time world championship, 30 years of film and television, 5 children, 13 grandchildren, a 7th on the way, a nonprofit that changed 100,000 lives, and an internet legacy that made him more famous in his 80s than most stars ever become in their prime. The Norris family closed their statement with these words: "We know many of you had heard about his recent hospitalization, and we are truly grateful for the prayers and support you sent his way. To him, you were not just fans. You were his friends." That is the legacy of Chuck Norris. Not the roundhouse kicks, not the memes, not the $70 million. The fact that a man with everything never forgot the people who had nothing. Rest in peace, Walker. Texas just got a little quieter. Comment below, what is your favorite Chuck Norris memory? And if this video moved you, share it with someone who grew up watching him, because some legacies deserve to be remembered out loud.